Hi, my name is Maria Eduarda Fontes. I am an undergraduate history student at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, participant of a research group called Social Construction of Authoritarian Regimes, and research fellow at FAPERJ under the supervision of Dr. Vinícius Liebel. Well, the research that this work presents started in September 2020, and its main purpose is to investigate how Punch, an English illustrated magazine, associated images of the feminine with representations of fascism and communism in the period between the Russian Revolution and the end of World War II. This work comes from the idea that these illustrations reflected and produced a certain worldview about the political novelties and the social changes of the period. Thus, this presentation seeks to explore the worldview of the magazine's readers and artists through the interpretation of two representative cartoons. The perspectives of cultural history of politics and women's history, as well as the documentary method, are the basis of this analysis, which interprets the cartoons as products and producers of a certain imaginary. In the post-war Europe, the economic, political, and social instabilities favored the emergence of new imaginaries and political regimes. The tensions of those times were central to the development of a critical view of modernity, favoring the emergence of new ways of acting, thinking, and doing politics. In the sphere of politics, liberalism and democracy were questioned, and new regimes such as socialism, fascism, and Nazism emerged. These tensions also favored the formation of new emotional regimes based on the feelings of fear, rancor, and hatred. However, different from what happened in other countries after the World War I, British liberal democracy remained strong, as well as the freedom of expression. Well, founded in 1841, Punch was a British satirical magazine which circulated until 2002. The magazine stood out for its smart and acid humor that was able to arouse the fascination not only of ordinary people but also of specialists in cartoons, counting on readers all over the world. Through a common language based on visual and textual metaphors, the magazine produced cartoons that dialogued with the imaginary of its readers, a crucial point to understand the magazine's enduring popularity and its active role as part of the British history. Still almost unexplored, Punch cartoons are excellent historical sources to investigate the impact of the transformations that took place during the interwar period on the British public opinion. This is because the magazine reached the height of its popularity between the 20s and the 40s by producing images with a strong political and critical content. Guided by the perspectives of women's history and by the theoretical principles of the cultural history of politics, this work seeks to interpret the symbolic character behind the cartoons. As Judith Butler points out, gender categories are culturally constructed and thus subject to change. At the same time that conservative worldviews is still hegemonic, aimed to confine the feminine to the domestic sphere, the spread of modern values and the conquest of new opportunities influenced the behavior of many women, especially in urban areas. Since the cartoons from Punch magazine are social cultural products linked both to the political context and to the daily lives of their readers and artists, our reflections are also based on the definition of the politics as a place of articulation between the social and its representation. These cartoons are available online in the Punch magazine cartoon archive. The method used to analyze these sources is the documentary method created by Ralf Bohnsack and adapted by Vinícius Liebel to the analysis of cartoons. The fundamental premise of this method is the search for the deep and social nature of the source. The reconstructive character of the method favors a change in focus from who is represented to the artist, enabling a qualitative analysis of the images. For those interested, the explanation of the methodology is further explained in the text that will be published. Among 267 collected cartoons, two representative cartoons were chosen to be analyzed here following the steps of the documentary method. To see each image, just point your camera to QR codes. The first cartoon was published in May 1922. The pre-iconographic analysis identifies the elements that constitutes the cartoon. An attractive woman in a sophisticated costume dances with a bear wearing boots and gloves in an elegant salon. The bear keeps its mouth open and holds the woman around her waist. Its face is slightly upturned and its eyes conveys strength. The woman wears low-heeled shoes, a dress below the knees, and a tiara with the word Europa. Her face is close to the bear's mouth and slightly tilted back. Also, her expression suggests that she is scared. The iconographic analysis identifies that the representation of the bear in boots in a saloon reveals a negative connotation, which refers to its inadequacy for such an environment, although it tries to fit in wearing gloves and dancing. On the other hand, in comparison with the strong and powerful animal that potentially poses a threat to her, the woman is fragile. In this sense, the bear can be identified as the post-revolutionary Russia, which represents a potential danger to Europe. Applying the iconic method through tracing two opposing diagonal lines, it is clear that the focal point of the cartoon is the bear's arm that wraps around the woman's waist. In fact, the diagonals show that the bear is the main focus of the cartoon, since it occupies all four spaces created by the diagonals. The movement is manifested in the dance, which highlights the bear and configures it as a potential threat to the woman when it presses her against itself. In a sexualized way, the bear maintains its mouth open and involves the woman with its arms and legs, not allowing movements other than those carried by him. The direction of the woman's gaze to the bear's mouth and her facial expression also confirm this interpretation. The reflected interpretation suggests that this is a representation of the threat that the post-revolutionary Russia represents to Europe on a certain imaginary shared by the artists and by most of magazine's readers. Even wearing gloves and dancing, the bear is potentially threatening because of its size, strength, and posture. Furthermore, the representation of the feminine reflects what Simone de Beauvoir called the woman's myth, as it refers to the fragility associated with the feminine in the patriarchal will. Finally, the cartoon's title and caption say, "The bear hug, Miss Europe. Aren't you rather squeezing me? Russia, well, you wanted me to dance, and this is my rough Soviet way of doing it." The Bolshevist delegation at Genoa has refused to grant the demands of the powers unless Russia is simultaneously supplied with a heavy loan. The sum of 200 millions has been mentioned. Thus, the textual elements support the analysis of the visual elements and complement the understanding of the image, indicating that the scene refers to an event in which Russia sought to receive this large loan in the context of the Russian Civil War in exchange of accepting the demands of the powers in Genoa. Presenting Europe in a fragile position, the cartoon subliminally asserts that the powers can make demands, but who is guiding the movement is Russia, which accepts them or not. In this sense, the representation of post-revolutionary Russia as a rude bear that squeezes and controls Europe, represented as a naive woman, produces and reflects a certain British imaginary about socialism and the feminine. The second cartoon was published in September 1936. The pre-iconographic analysis identifies a woman and a man in a room with two beds wearing pajamas. The man is crouched looking for something or someone under the bed and holding something that resembles a fireplace poker in his right hand. He has a swastika stamped on his left arm, and on the wall over his bed there is a frame with the words in German, meaning Germany above all. The woman looks at the man with an annoyed expression, with her mouth opened and her eyebrows raised. So she probably woke up because of him. On her nightcap is written the word Europa, indicating that the feminine again represents the European continent. There is also a small curtain separating the beds. As the man's bed remains intact, apparently he did not go to sleep. The iconographic analysis indicates that the representation of man presents a critical character to Nazism. Looking for something or someone under the bed, the Nazi man looks paranoid. Meanwhile, unlike the other cartoon, the representation of the feminine as Europe is materialized in the figure of a more mature and austere woman, who apparently tells the man to go to bed irritated to be woken up by him. Applying the iconic method, it is noted that there is a greater color contrast in the man, which draws attention to his attitude. Furthermore, the swastika is aligned with the vertical center of the image, and the woman's gaze is directed towards the Nazi man, indicating that he is the main figure in the cartoon. The context of the cartoon's production is the years after the Nazism's rise to power in Germany. Thus, the reflected interpretation indicates that the man is a representation of Nazism according to a certain British worldview, which portrays the Nazis as paranoids. Furthermore, the two separate beds, the curtain and the square over the second bed, indicate an ideological matter and worldview separation between Europe and the Nazi Germany. In this sense, Germany is seen as other, outside the European continent and distant from its ideas. This indicates that until the eve of World War II, Nazism was not seen as a threat to Europe, but as an exogenous and comic element. Lastly, the title of the cartoon and its caption say, "The Bolsheviks bogey, Europa, do stop fussing, Adolf, and lie down," muffled voice. Can't you realize that there is a Bolshevik lurking under every bed? Since bogey is a British expression referring to an imaginary evil spirit, the textual elements conform the interpretation of the visual elements and further enhance the understanding of this imaginary. Therefore, the man is represented as childish because he fears the existence of an imaginary Bolshevik under his bed. In this logic, the fear of the right danger present in the Nazi imagination is mocked in the cartoon. Also, the textual elements indicate that this childish man is actually Adolf Hitler, the German Führer. This representation indicates the existence of a certain British worldview that not only infantilizes the Nazis and their fears, but also underestimates their power. As Paul Thompson points out, in England at the beginning of the 20th century, it was common to exist a curtain dividing a bedroom when two or more brothers of different sexes had to sleep in the same room due to lack of space. In this sense, it is possible to interpret the images of the woman represented in Europe as an older sister who has already overcome her fear of the bulky Bolshevist. Therefore, the representation of the feminine takes up on a positive connotation of more maturity in the face of an infantilized representation of Hitler and consequently of Nazi Germany itself. In the period that separates the publication of the cartoons, many transformations took place. In this sense, the cartoons reflect and produce not only different perspectives on the feminine, but also a change in the view of socialism. In the first cartoon, socialism is represented in the form of the beer, a major threat to Europe, and the feminine is the figure of the maiden, which represents Europe. In the second cartoon, Nazism is represented as an infantile Adolf Hitler, the socialism as an imaginary evil spirit, and the feminine as an older sister, which also represents Europe. These different representations of the feminine indicates two important aspects: the social roles of women in the British society of the time, as well as the views about the European continent itself. Between the damsel in distress and the older sister, Europe shows itself to be a continent in permanent mutation in relation to the new modernities that emerged in the first decades of the 20th century. Furthermore, both the fragile maiden and the older sister are part of the same ideal of femininity, in which women are considered to live childhood faster than men in the domestic sphere, while at the same time are seen as fragile and naive when concerned to social life. From the analysis of these representations and the examination of the rest of the documentary corpus, it is observed that in the first years after the October Revolution, socialism was perceived as a greater danger to Europe. However, these representations became less and less frequent after 1924, as Stalin assumed the leadership of the Soviet Union. In parallel, from 1933 onwards, cartoons with representations of Nazism became increasingly recurrent. However, the danger that the Nazis posed to the maintenance of peace in Europe was not yet evident in 1936, as noted in the analysis of the second cartoon. Based on a cultural and political perspective, the analysis presented showed the need to examine the different interpretive levels present in the images. Moreover, the reconstructivist character of the documentary method favors an interpretation of the cartoons from the perspectives of the cultural history of politics and the women's history. It demonstrates the importance of this method and its possibilities of use for the expansion of researches that use visual representations of the media as historical sources. To conclude, I would like to thank FAPESD for the scholarship that makes this research possible and Dr. Liebel for his effort in helping me at all stages. Thank you for your attention and feel free to contact me at any time in this email address. Here are the references. Thank you.